Good afternoon. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be a little bit of transparent, a little vulnerable, and I'm going to take you through sort of a real-world case study of something that we went through in 2018, which is effectively building a channel within a billion-dollar juggernaut, a business that was fueled primarily by a direct sales engine. So throughout the course of this, you're going to see me somewhat be prescriptive in terms of what I think people should do. But really what it's meant to do is highlight the way that we approached and thought about building a channel within LogMeIn. Now, interestingly enough, I think it was intuitive to a lot of us at LogMeIn when we started looking at the top 20 SaaS businesses on the planet, 19 of which had an affinity for partnering except for one. And that happened to be LogMeIn. So I'm going to take you through sort of kind of the top 10 things that we dealt with. Hopefully there's some things that resonate with you. Hopefully there's a few things that you take away from this. But at any rate, it's sort of the formula that we used. So first and foremost, I consider myself a go-to-market voyager. I've done direct sales. I've done indirect sales. I've worked for big public global companies like LogMeIn and Iron Mountain. I've worked for venture-backed businesses like Connected Corporation, private equity-owned, all points in between. So I'll tell you that it was by intent that my career worked out that way, but really more it was accidental. But at any rate, it's really helped me think about how the movement of products and services through various different sales channels, whether they be direct or indirect, to the ultimate end user can best be affected. So two quick perfunctory slides. I think many of you are familiar with LogMeIn, perhaps not so much familiar with LogMeIn, but certainly a handful of the products that we represent. LogMeIn is interesting in as much as it is organized into three principal business units. And the business units, not accidentally, happen to be in massive markets. So the first is our UCC business, used to be referred to as our communication and collaboration business. It's the long pole in the tent for LogMeIn. GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, our newly acquired UCC business, Jive, is part of that. Our customer engagement and support business, Bold 360 is part of our virtual assistant AI capability, rescue, IT remote support, and then our identity and access management. A number of you probably use LastPass. If you don't, you should. It's a great password management tool, and right now, this is a little bit dated, approaching 20 million global users. So that is effectively what fuels this $1.3 billion business that will be here in 2019. This next slide is interesting in as much as it sort of highlights the opportunity, but also the challenge that we had. So if you look at sort of the continuum here, we have everything from being a newborn to infancy, the toddler years, and now we're sort of in this interesting adolescent period where we're effectively a billion-dollar business. We're not a kid anymore, but we certainly haven't reached full maturity in terms of every aspect of our business. Interestingly enough, too, the challenge that we realized is, unlike most companies, we are embracing an indirect channel strategy at a very, very interesting point in our tenure as a business. We're a billion-dollar business, and we didn't have an indirect go-to-market bone in our body when we decided that this was something that we wanted to do. Companies, I think, for the most part, have sort of built their business, in many cases, around that indirect motion. We're actually doing something that was quite the opposite, which has presented opportunities, but also a series of challenges that I'll speak to. In every company, there are controlling authorities. In some companies, it's sales and marketing. In some cases, it's engineering and product. At LogMeIn, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, it just is what it is, it's legal and finance. And anything new that is going to see the light of day in our business has to be addressed by our legal and finance folks. And I'll sort of take you through that narrative first and foremost. But this is, I think, an interesting ad. This is Shackleton's 1913 ad looking for people who effectively, hey, interested in long hours, low pay, chance of survival slim, any takers? This is effectively what was the conversation that I had with Larry D'Angelo, who is our CSO, still is our CSO, regarding building the channel. And he knew that I had some partner DNA, that I'd done this from scratch, and that I had something more than just a transactional relationship with channels. And I was conscripted for duty, so to speak. So, and interestingly enough, I thought I was going for the ad below, working at the leather shop, neat appearing young men of pleasing personality. Apparently that wasn't the case. So legal and finance. This is something I think in many cases people will want to run away from. They want to put this conversation off as long as possible. In our case, we went right through the front door. And we had obviously come up with the framework of the program that we were going to launch. We had a philosophy that we were going to employ that I'll share in some of the later slides. And some of the questions that they asked us was, first and foremost, what is your strategy? How are you going to think about creating this sort of embryonic effort to build a program that it's actually going to scale globally and actually contribute to our bottom line? And fair enough, some of these guys too, and it was important. One of the things that I think Randy and I recognized very quickly was, I think there's only 20 or 25 people within this business who get sort of the notion of channels and business development indirect motions within LogMeIn, a company of just under 4,000. So part of it was making sure that along the way that we were educating people and helping them understand sort of the value that's brought by the channel, and suspend your disbelief and invest in anticipation of, and goodness will come. So as part of that, one of the things that we did too is we were highly transparent about, here's the steps that we're taking, here's how we're actually going to do it. We're going to give you the answers to the test before we actually give you the test. This is we're going to assess and implement. We're going to spend time with the product teams. We're going to go belly to belly with the 3 BUs that I shared with you earlier and understand what are the priorities that they have, making sure that the product agenda informs the partnering agenda, all of those things. And we were also very, very careful about sort of the upfront contract in terms of what we were going to do. The good news is we did everything that we said we were going to do, but ultimately, if you're not clear and transparent and declarative around what it is you intend to do or how you intend to do it, there's a good chance that the program could hit a bumpy road. This is something we spent a lot of time on. In fact, I would say, Randy, I think you'd agree with me, we burnt a lot of calories going belly to belly across the company, helping them understand what it is that we're doing and how it was going to be helpful and additive to what they did. The first thing that we didn't do is leverage industry jargon around channels. We didn't say VAR, MSP, or MSSP, or BPO, or SI. We talked about the motions of the products and how the partner could play a role in affecting the movement of that product and service in a value-based way. The other thing, and the sort of the old saying is, at least at LogMeIn, there's no politics at LogMeIn, but there's politicians, which meant that we had to make sure that those folks who were never going to get it and never going to understand the value of the channel, that we found a way to sort of insulate their feedback and input, and instead really did a great job of, I think, promoting the people who did get it, giving them a megaphone and helping them speak on our behalf. This is how we define partner value. This is, and I think everybody here, if you've worked in a channel format, if you work with channels, so sort of the classic, what are these guys doing for us anyways? So, what do we get out of it? I got to pay them money and blah, blah, blah. So we frankly, we made it real simple for people to understand. Ultimately, it's something we can't do, something we don't want to do, and something that they can do better. And if there's a fourth one, It's effectively that in a lot of cases, in fact, most cases, the customer is going to have an opinion in terms of who they want to work with when it comes to procuring and utilizing our technology. So this is something that, over a year in at this point, classic tell them again, tell them what you told them, and give them a ton of examples in terms of, what we mean when we talk about partner value and the role that partners play. So this guy up here still doesn't get it, but we're going to keep telling him. This may be actually, in hindsight, if I had to put one at the top, this is probably the one that I would put. At the end of the day, one of the things that I think, and we had various channel motions over the course of LogMeIn, but also the pre-merger with Citrix Gecko, and there were skunkworks projects. There were these low-flying black ops, let's find a way to partner, and but none of it saw the light of the day. None of it was programmatized. And we needed somebody of high standing within this business to be declarative around, hey, listen, this is something we're going to do. All right, so you don't get a vote. We're doing this. It's student body left for us. I just have this sort of verbatim quote from Mark Van Zettelhoff, who's our new COO, came to us from IBM Security, where he's effectively saying, hey, this is the way it's going to be. We are going to have 3 legs to our go-to-market. One's going to be direct. Obviously, that's the big enchilada. E-com, in terms of people who want to help themselves. And guess what? The way that we're going to get to that other half of the planet, the people who can calculably benefit from what we do, is going to be on the backs of partners. So that was a critically important declaration for us to get, and we use that as sort of a 007 shoot-to-kill card in terms of being able to navigate across the organization and get people to sort of genuflect somewhat to what it is we're trying to do from a partnering perspective. This is important too. Again, there's 3 BUs, and in those BUs, there's GMs, there's products, there's engineers, there's sales leaders. There's a number of different constituencies that, frankly, have to be at the table as we think about building out the channel motion and strategy for those particular BUs, pan-global, pan-BU. And it does take a village. So it can't just be this handful of merry men and women who have taken on Shackleton's mission here. It is, in fact, people who have to have dirt under their fingernails to get the program off the ground. So we introduced a cross-functional group of core teams that meet on a regular basis to help define the strategy, to help make sure that we understand what we're doing in first half 2019, second half 2019, and what we hope to get accomplished in 2020, and the resource and investment that it's going to take to do that. That has been a game changer for us in terms of how we think about the priorities for each of the BUs. So for IAM, Identity and Access Management, it is focusing heavily on MSP, MSSP community. On our CES business unit, it is focusing very, very rigorously on BPOs and SIs and working with some of the name brand companies that many of you know. For our UCC business, it's leveraging a company that we bought in Jive Communications and a relatively big VoIP telco channel that they have. How can we start to affect the movement of our CNC products through that channel? All of these things are sort of coming to fruition as we've applied a lot of analytical rigor to it. And this is the less is more philosophy that I have. I worked with Daniel way in the back, and he and I subscribed to this philosophy when we were at Iron Mountain Digital. And it's the belief that don't fall into the trap of having a lot of dusty logos on your website that somehow is a proxy for productivity and performance. Work with some people who, frankly, where there's parity, there's sponsorship. It's not going to be a time-based relationship. You're in it together. You understand that it's going to evolve over time. It's scalable and sustainable in that regard. And there's a reward system for both of you in this relationship. And I think in doing that, it has meant a couple things. First, It has allowed us to focus on a smaller group of partners in the 40 countries that we now have them, and work much more closely and avoid sort of that radio silence that often comes along with when you have 25,000 partners. Now, having said that, I think there are clearly companies that have the resource and scale to support that kind of channel. At this particular point, early on, we certainly don't. But we are going to avoid the NASCAR logos that everyone sort of says, hey, they got a lot of logos on their car, but nobody knows what the hell they are, what they do, or how they've performed. Another thing I'll just offer here, and this is advice I got from someone that I had worked for back in the day. He said, listen, in baseball, you hit 300, you go to the Hall of Fame. But that means that you fail 7 out of 10 times. It's sort of an interesting reward system for baseball. We can't afford to fail 7 out of 10 times. We can't afford to kiss that many frogs. So we are focused on much more, hey, we need to hit 800. We need to have revenue productive partners that are born again hard on what it is that we do, over the course of from here till then. It's served us well. It's been a good approach, and one that, if I have anything to do with it, we'll stick with. Partner DNA. Again, I sort of mentioned in passing, we had, there's probably 25 or 30 people at LogMeIn who had actually gotten dirt under their fingernails in terms of building a program. There's a lot of people who will say, oh yeah, I know everything about a channel. I've worked with channels, but it's in a very sort of, monolithic transactional basis. So what we did, and we had to do this, was instead of taking, people who are pocketed across the business and sort of conscripting into the business, we went outside and we got sort of best of breed talent. Sort of people like, Gerald Byrne, who heads up our EMEA channel effort, worked at Dell, spent a lot of time crafting and building the channel from a EMEA and rest of world perspective. Anand Parikh, who has spent a lot of time, 30 years in fact, doing business development deals with BPOs, telcos, SIs. Martha, who helped build a LATAM channel program in a previous life. Tanya, who has worked with DMRs and distribution in her career. She spent some time at Insight Enterprises. And as I like to refer to him, the Godfather, Randy Farbach, who actually has a great sort of basis of institutional knowledge and tribal knowledge that he's brought over the past 18 to 20 years in Citrix and LogMeIn. That's just an example of what we did. It was important that we had people on our team that were not afraid to take this mission and build it from scratch, because it's going to take a lot of hard work. So, I talked earlier about the controlling authorities at LogMeIn, legal and finance. And one of the things that is important is, and one of the things that they wanted to know is, how are you going to measure your success? Like, what does good look like for you? And, we have sort of a dashboard view of the world, which goes into excruciating detail in terms of how are our partners performing, who is not performing, and I'm trying to understand why. We look at all the sort of things that anyone who, especially given sort of my sales DNA, I'd want to know: average deal size, conversion rates, propensity for multi-product sales, things like that. And this has helped us tremendously. In other words, we don't have to get up and sort of flap our arms and say, it's coming along great, stay tuned, the program's off to a rockin' start, wait till 2019, 2020. We're able to say, quarter over quarter, we're actually, as I stand here today, we're 50% ahead of where we were at the same point last year. And here's what we're seeing in the form of average deal size. 85% of our business going through our alliance vehicle, which is traditional resale, versus 15%, which is going through a traditional referral channel. Why is that important? That was one of the concerns that our legal and finance team said. Listen, we would prefer to have more of the heavy lifting done by partners versus be in a position where we, not to diminish the role of referral because it's a big one, But that's still, at this point, somewhat problematic for the business and one that we're working through. I talked a little bit about not getting hung up on the channel vernacular and the lexicon that we like to use around, hey, this type of partner does this, and this type of partner does that. The first thing we did is, and the way that we talk about it, is the motions associated with our products. When we built the program, the first thing we did was spend time with customers, prospective partners. Frankly, we looked at a lot of the folks in this room who have programs and took sort of the best elements of it and applied it to how we think about it. So we really, in some cases, have reverse engineered to the perfect beast of partner. And I shared some of those elements on the previous page. Somebody who's got an abbreviated line card, somebody who obviously has an affinity to the types of products that we offer in our various BUs. Somebody who can take us into that other half of the planet, frankly, that we can't get to on the backs of a direct sales organization. And it's really, really served us well. And it's it's a prescription that we intend to follow. So that was nice. How'd it work out? So the voyage has been, by all accounts, exceeded my expectation in the first year. We sort of described it as phase one, which was we wanted to plant our flag, we wanted to get to critical mass, we wanted to demonstrate that we could be revenue positive, but we also wanted to look at the other sort of indicators, some of which that you heard earlier today in terms of growth and profitability and things like that. So the things that are most interesting aside from this is with our partners, and keep in mind all of the different channels that we have at LogMeIn. We've got 800 quota carriers. We've got an e-com channel that's relatively robust. But it's the highest average deal size of any of our channels, or anything that contributes to the revenue engine at LogMeIn. Highest conversion rates, almost obscenely high, which means that when our partners are engaged in an opportunity, there is a better than average chance that deal is going to close better and faster than if a direct salesperson was involved. And I think this is the most interesting thing. We talked about sort of the 3 BUs and sort of the way it's illustrated there. It's kind of stovepiped and sterile and never the twain shall meet. But we also see the greatest propensity for multi-product sales occurring with this channel as a result of what we built and how we've thought about it versus the way our direct sales organization thinks about it, which is in many cases myopically looking at it, hey, I'm only engaged in this opportunity to sell GoToWebinar, or I'm only engaged in this opportunity to sell Bold 360 AI. So this is the good news. The somewhat more daunting challenge is the presentation that I hope to give a year from now, which will involve dealing with bigger numbers and more complexity as we begin to sort of integrate various channels of companies that we have acquired and will acquire over the course of 2019. So that's the voyage that we've been on. It won't be easy. For those of you who have gone through it and endured it, I think you would corroborate that comment. For those of you who haven't, trust me, if you think about it and you do the upfront work and you conscript people, correct people into the process, it will be a big win. So as I sort of play out the Voyager analogy, fair winds and following seas, I thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Questions for David from the room? Yes, in the front.
Good job, Dave, and congratulations. That is not an easy voyage.
No, it's I'm 28 and I've got gray hair, so go figure.
Looking good for 28, Dave.
Thank you. I started this when I was 8.
So I'm curious, one of the big challenges I'm sure you're facing is with the direct sales team.
Yeah.
And that direct culture gets so ingrained. Mm-hmm. How are you overcoming it? Because that team can make or break you.
100%.
So the reps and the sales managers, how are you getting them on board?
The first thing we do, frankly, is we want to make everyone else famous but us. So, part of this too, I should have probably called this out as part of the negotiation we did with legal and finance. Comp neutrality is big. In fact, it is, it's carved into the stones of building a channel, and certainly at least initially. So we're very, very vocal about so-and-so helped close this deal, and they're going to President's Club in Dubai because they worked with this particular partner to get this particular deal. So if you do that enough times, that hearts and minds effort that I spoke to really starts to do a lot of the heavy lifting. And I think we've really been good about that. Now, as you know full well, there are going to be some people who will never be convinced, and that's okay. And we very subtly suggested those are the people who aren't going to President's Club in Dubai this year. So, but it's going belly to belly. It's promoting those folks who, even if they're somewhat resistant up front, ultimately have said, okay, I get it. I see the value. I couldn't have had that audience with that customer had it not been for that partner. And I think the other thing that we're seeing too is that, again, when we look at the motion, we went through this exercise of the motions. Why do people buy our stuff, and from whom do they buy? A lot of people don't want to buy sort of, point products. They want one throat to choke. They want one person to aggregate all of their purchases. And when you sort of bring direct salespeople to the realization that you are better situated by working with a partner who effectively has a direct line into procurement, into the mahogany row front office of that particular company, who already has a contract in place, by any definition, that's value. And I think for the most part, people have gotten that.
Down the front.
Good stuff. So as you were building it, LogMeIn is a brand very well known, but on the other side, there's so much noise in front of the partners that for a smaller startup, it's difficult to get engagement from these partners. So what advice do you have for, let's say, a startup doing, say, 30, 40 million in ARR, but have a very channel-friendly product?
Well, I think, in some cases, we have the benefit of just girth as given our size. In many cases, we had to do a lot of the same things. So it's not like we put a shingle out and all of a sudden, there was just this rush to sign up. We've had to be very strategic and surgical around picking the types of partners that we want to work with. We kind of came up with, here's the criterion, and here's the list of partners that we think can capitally benefit from what we do, and we can benefit from what they do, and went out and talked with them. In some cases, it worked out. In some cases, it didn't. So I think the first thing I would say is have an opinion around the people that you want to work with. And what are you prepared to give to that partner, but also have an understanding about what it is that you want from them. For example, we're a $1 billion revenue business, but there are a lot of companies that we want to partner with who are bigger than us. And early on, the company was sort of like, well, how is it that we can't partner with the Googles and the Microsofts and the, just sort of the gold-plated names in our industry? And part of it was because we couldn't tell them what we wanted from them. So, nor we couldn't tell them what we were prepared to give them. And so that, and again, in the spirit of transparency and candor and vulnerability, that's something that we're still working through. But have an opinion around the people that you want to work with. That's the first thing. Don't go into this blind, and don't sort of fall in love or get infatuated with a particular company just because it happens to have, sort of a marquee brand and global reach and a lot of resource. There has to be parity, regardless of what size business you are. So that's how I'd answer that.
And down the front.
Thank you very much. That was really great. My question for you is, what is your team internally look like that supports your partners? Like, what are the different components of that, and how large is that team for you guys?
So right now, it's a relatively nimble team. It's about 25 people that are supporting this massive effort. Now, those are the people who wake up every day accountable for our partner business. The one thing that we've done, and I think it's actually served us well, is there's probably another 150 people sort of outside of that kind of first nucleus of 25 that are waking up every day helping to support us in terms of sales operations, product management, customer success, I go on and on and on. And that's critical too. You cannot just, go into a cave and 30 days later come out with mushrooms and say, look what I grew in the dark. It has to be something that other functional areas are involved in. So it's about 150 people. The other thing that's helped us, frankly, is again, getting back to the mandate. We are doing this, pound the desk.
Yeah, thank you.
Any last final questions? All right, one more.
I notice you're aligned with the sales leadership, and I've seen BD in sales or in marketing and even in product. Can you just talk a little bit about your executive alignment and how that breaks down barriers or causes problems?
So, the one thing that is helpful about being part of the sales organization, and when we built it, I made sure that business development reported into the sales organization. Sales is a profit center, and it still is a big driver in terms of garnering support across the business. So that was one of the reasons. I think the second reason is ultimately why we exist as a business. At least is kind of how we framed it. Is we are job number one is affecting the movement of revenue for us and our partners, and doing it in a way that creates a stickiness with customers. So being part of that sales motion has been absolutely critical to our success. So I sit at the table with the VPs of sales for each of the BUs, head of sales operations. We report to the CSO. So we're all on the same page, and there's tight alignment between all of us. I think that's absolutely helped. I've been part of organizations where biz dev has been closer to the product motion or the sort of non-selling effort. In this particular case, I think it served us well. So.
Well, thank you,
Cool.
David. Would
Thank
you
you so
all
much.
thank
Appreciate it.
David?